Have you ever stared into the depths of an ocean and felt it staring back? Not the playful waters that lap at the shores of tourist beaches, but the true deep, that endless void where light itself goes to die. We think we've conquered the seas with our technology and our hubris, but down there we're nothing but intruders in an alien world that never wanted us. I should know. I led the team that discovered something we were never meant to find. The research vessel Erebus creaked beneath my feet as I watched our submersible, the Nereid, being prepped for descent. The mid-Atlantic stretched endlessly in every direction, a deceptively peaceful blanket of blue concealing the abyss below. My hands trembled slightly as I reviewed the classified coordinates on my tablet one last time, though whether from excitement or dread, I couldn't say. "Final checks complete, Dr. Marlowe." Captain Dominic Reyes' gruff voice cut through my thoughts. His weathered face betrayed no emotion, but I caught him earlier, staring at the sonar readings with poorly concealed unease. The trench we were investigating didn't appear on any official maps. According to our anonymous benefactor, it was the deepest point ever discovered. Dr. Rafael Vega bounded over, his enthusiasm apparent in every movement. "The ROVs are prepped and ready. Whatever's down there, we'll find it." He grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. Even our resident adrenaline junkie seemed affected by the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over the ship. Tara Negg, our robotics expert, was already seated in the Nereid, running through her pre-dive checklist for the third time. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, but I noticed how they lingered over the emergency protocols. The woman's claustrophobia was well documented, yet she'd insisted on coming. Something about this mission drew us all in like moths to a flame. As we began our descent, the surface light gradually faded, replaced by the artificial glow of our external lamps. The water pressure increased, groaning against the Nereid's hull like a living thing trying to crush us. Each meter deeper felt like crossing another threshold, moving further from the world we knew into something else. At 3,000 meters, we encountered the bioluminescent bloom. It wasn't listed in any of our briefing materials, yet there it was, a vast curtain of living light that pulsed with an unsettling rhythm. The organisms moved in perfect synchronization, creating patterns that seemed almost deliberate. "This isn't right," Tara whispered, her face illuminated by the glow of her monitors. "The bioluminescent behavior, it's responding to our presence. But that's impossible at this depth. There's no way they could detect us from this distance." Captain Reyes let out a forced chuckle. "If I had $1 for every impossible thing I've seen in these waters." He trailed off as the sonar pinged, indicating a massive structure ahead. The reading was so large it initially registered as an error. "What the hell?" Vega leaned forward, adjusting the settings. "That can't be right. According to this, we're looking at something roughly the size of the Burj Khalifa. Down here..." I felt a chill run down my spine as the sonar image became clearer. The object was perfectly still, defying the ocean currents that should have affected anything of its size. As we drew closer, the bioluminescent organisms parted around our submersible like a curtain, revealing what lay beyond. None of us spoke, none of us could. In the beam of our lights, something waited in the darkness. Something that would change our understanding of reality forever. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard my brother's last words before his own deep-sea expedition vanished. "Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again." What defines the boundary between the natural and the artificial? In our arrogance, we humans believe we can easily distinguish between the two. But in the deepest places of our world, where pressure can crush diamonds and darkness reigns eternal, such distinctions become meaningless. What we found in that abyssal plane defied all such categorization. The structure loomed before us, its surface a nightmare of biomechanical complexity. At first glance, it appeared to be made of some sort of metal, but as our lights played across its surface, we could see it ripple and shift like living tissue. Carvings that seemed to follow some alien mathematics crawled across its skin, glowing veins pulsing beneath with a sickly phosphorescence. "Jesus Christ," Captain Reyes breathed, his usual stoicism shattered. That can't be..." Dr. Vega was already taking readings, his instrument struggling to make sense of what we were seeing. The material composition is impossible. It's reading as both organic and inorganic simultaneously. The density measurements keep fluctuating, like it's constantly changing its molecular structure. I pressed my hand against the viewing port, trying to comprehend the scale of what we were seeing. The obelisk stretched beyond the reach of our lights, its surface an ever-shifting canvas of impossible geometries. These weren't the clean lines of human architecture, they were organic, alive, moving with a purpose that spoke of intelligence far beyond our understanding. "Look at the symmetry," I whispered, more to myself than the others. "This isn't random formation, this is language." The patterns flowing across the structure's surface seemed to respond to my words, rippling outward like stones dropped in a pond. Tara's instruments began to spark and whine, screens flickering with interference patterns that matched the pulses of light emanating from the monolith. "We're losing systems," she reported, fingers dancing across failing controls. "Whatever that thing is, it's generating some kind of electromagnetic field, but it's not like anything I've ever seen. The wavelengths are all wrong." "Wrong how?" Reyes demanded, but Tara just shook her head, staring at her readings in disbelief. "Wrong like they don't exist in nature. Wrong like they shouldn't be possible according to the laws of physics as we understand them." Dr. Vega had been unusually quiet, his usual excitement replaced by something closer to religious awe. "We need to get closer," he finally said. "This could be it. Proof of non-terrestrial intelligence. Think about it. What if this is what we've been looking for all along? Not in space, but in our own oceans." As if in response to his words, a low vibration began to pulse through the Nereid's hull. It resonated at a frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The structure's surface began to shift more rapidly now, the patterns coalescing into forms that seemed almost familiar, like letters in an alphabet I could almost, but not quite, read. This isn't just a structure, I realized, horror and fascination warring in my mind. It's a message, or a warning. That's when our primary lights failed, leaving us illuminated only by the ethereal glow of the monolith itself. In that sickly light, I could have sworn I saw shapes moving within the structure's translucent surface, vast, shadowy forms that defied description. The worst part wasn't the loss of our equipment, or even the growing sense that we were in the presence of something that challenged everything we thought we knew about life and intelligence. No, the worst part was the growing certainty that the monolith wasn't just aware of us, it was studying us back. How many times in human history have we opened doors that should have remained closed? Not out of fear or superstition, but because we weren't ready for what lay behind them. I've often wondered if curiosity is humanity's greatest strength or the flaw that will ultimately destroy us. The entrance we discovered was less a door than a wound in the structure's surface, a perfect oval of absolute darkness that seemed to absorb our remaining light. The edges pulsed with that same biomechanical rhythm we'd observed on the exterior, like a mouth breathing in the pressurized water around us. "Atmospheric readings are stable," Tara reported, though her voice quavered slightly. "The cavity appears to be filled with water, but the composition is different. Higher oxygen content, traces of elements I can't even identify." "The drone's prepped," Reyes announced, his military training evident in his clipped tones. "But I want it on record that I think this is a terrible idea." I nodded absently, my attention fixed on the entrance. Something about it seemed familiar, tickling at the edges of my memory. The patterns around it reminded me of the last photos my brother had sent before his expedition vanished. Strange markings on the ocean floor that the scientific community had dismissed as camera artifacts. "Launching ROV," Tara announced, and we watched as our remote drone slipped into the darkness. The feed from its cameras showed an interior that defied explanation. The walls weren't solid, but seemed to be composed of interlocking moving segments, like the inside of some vast living machine. Columns of what appeared to be liquid metal rose from floor to ceiling, but they flowed upward against gravity. "Those patterns," Vega muttered, pointing to a series of raised glyphs along one wall. They're similar to what we saw outside, but more ordered, like the difference between natural crystal formation and written language. The drone's lights illuminated something that made us all fall silent. A piece of wreckage, unmistakably human in origin. As we maneuvered closer, I felt my heart stop. There, half embedded in the living wall, was a submersible's hull plate bearing a familiar logo, the same expedition that had taken my brother. Before anyone could react, our drone's feed dissolved into static. The darkness beyond the entrance seemed to deepen, if that was possible, and I felt rather than heard a subsonic pulse that made the Nereid shudder. "Power fluctuations throughout all systems," Tara reported, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Whatever that pulse was, it's affecting everything electronic. Backup systems are barely..." The lights went out. In the absolute darkness that followed, I heard something that haunts my dreams to this day. A sound like vast machinery coming to life, and beneath it, almost too quiet to hear, what could have been human whispers. Have you ever experienced that moment when reality shifts? When everything you thought you knew about the world reveals itself to be nothing but a comforting lie? They say that in the depths of the ocean, pressure can crush a human body into something the size of a coffee can. But what I learned that day was that pressure isn't just physical. Sometimes the weight of revelation can crush your mind just as effectively. In the darkness of our powerless submersible, the first thing we became aware of was the humming. Not the mechanical drone of failing systems or the groan of stressed metal, but something else, something that seemed to bypass our ears entirely and vibrate directly in our bones. It started as a low frequency, barely perceptible, but grew in intensity until it felt like our skulls would shatter. "Emergency power engaged," Tara announced, her voice tight with strain. The backup lights sputtered to life, casting weak, reddish illumination through the cabin. But none of us were looking at our instruments anymore. All eyes were fixed on what lay beyond our viewport. Where there had been only the biomechanical surface of the structure before, now there was something else, something impossible. An eye, if you could call it that, had opened in the living wall. It was massive, larger than our entire submersible, its surface a swirling vortex of colors that shouldn't exist at this depth. The pupil, a void of such perfect darkness it seemed to bend light around it, fixed upon us with terrible intelligence. "Holy Mother of..." Reyes couldn't finish the sentence. His hands gripped the controls so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Dr. Vega was frantically trying to capture readings, but every instrument we had was going haywire. The energy signatures, they're off the charts. Whatever this is, it's not just alive, it's generating enough power to run a small city. But I couldn't move, couldn't speak, because in that eye, in those impossible colors and that bottomless pupil, I saw something. Images, fragments of memory, both mine and not mine. I saw my brother's last moments, saw what he had discovered, saw why he had chosen to disappear rather than return to the surface with what he knew. "This isn't a structure," I whispered, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "It's not a building or a ship or a prison, it's a door. And we just rang the bell." The humming changed pitch, becoming a resonance that made my teeth vibrate and my vision blur. In the swirling colors of that vast eye, patterns began to form, the same symbols we'd seen on the exterior, but now they moved with purpose, telling a story I could almost understand. "Dr. Marlowe," Tara's voice cracked with fear. "The readings. Something's happening to the water around us. The molecular structure is changing." She was right. The water visible in our lights was behaving strangely, forming crystalline patterns that defied physics. It was as if reality itself was being rewritten around us. That's when the voice came. Not through our comm systems, they were still dead, but directly in our minds. It spoke in concepts rather than words, in images that burned themselves into our consciousness. I saw vast cities beneath alien suns, creatures that defied description moving between dimensions as easily as we move between rooms. I saw wars fought with weapons that could unmake reality, and I saw why this place had been built. "Oh God," Vega breathed, and I knew he was seeing it too. It's not just alive, it's been waiting. All this time, it's been waiting for someone to find it. The eye blinked, a sideways motion that seemed to momentarily tear a hole in space itself. And in that moment, I understood with terrible clarity why some things are meant to stay hidden, why some discoveries can destroy not just the discoverer, but everything they've ever known or loved. And I understood that it was far too late to turn back. They say that in moments of extreme terror, time slows down. But what they don't tell you is that it's not time that's changing. It's your perception of reality itself beginning to crack. As I watched those biomechanical tendrils emerge from the living walls of the structure, I wondered, how many layers of reality exist beneath the one we think we know? And more importantly, what happens when those layers start to bleed into one another? The roar had become deafening, a sound that existed somewhere between mechanical thunder and biological screaming. The entire structure was moving now, its surface rippling like the skin of some vast creature awakening from eons of slumber. The crystalline patterns in the water had spread, creating formations that seemed to fold in on themselves in ways that hurt to look at. Multiple hull breaches imminent. Tara's voice had taken on a hysteric edge as she fought with the controls. The pressure readings, they're impossible. It's like the normal laws of physics don't apply anymore. Tendrils of living metal, each larger than our submersible, reached for us with terrible purpose. They moved with an organic grace that belied their metallic appearance, their surfaces covered in the same shifting symbols we'd seen before. But now I could almost read them, almost understand. "We need to move. Now!" Reyes bellowed, wrestling with the controls. But the Nereid's engines screamed in protest as more tendrils wrapped around our hull, pulling us deeper into the structure. The metal of our submersible groaned under pressures it was never designed to withstand. Dr. Vega had stopped taking readings and was staring out the viewport, his face a mask of horrified fascination. The structure, it's not just changing shape, it's changing its fundamental nature. The barrier between organic and inorganic matter is breaking down. It's evolving. He was right. The walls around us had become something that defied description, neither solid nor liquid, neither alive nor dead, but some impossible state in between. And through gaps in this ever-shifting material, I caught glimpses of spaces that couldn't exist, vast chambers that seemed to extend forever, filled with geometric shapes that folded through dimensions our minds couldn't process. "The hull integrity is at 40%, Tara reported, her voice barely a whisper. "Whatever's pulling us in, it's not just using physical force. The molecular structure of our hull is changing. It's like it's trying to absorb us." Through the viewport, I watched as one of our external cameras was enveloped by a tendril. The metal of the camera housing didn't break or crush. It simply began to merge with the tendril, the boundary between the two materials becoming indistinct, then non-existent. "Eliza," Reyes said quietly, using my first name for the first time since we'd met. "What the hell did we find down here?" Before I could answer, a new sound cut through the chaos, a rhythmic pulsing that made my vision blur and my thoughts scatter. Through the viewport, I saw something moving in the depths of the structure, something vast, something that should not be. "It's a prison," I whispered, the truth finally crystallizing in my mind. "But not for what we think of as life. It's a prison for something much worse. Something that existed before our universe had rules, and we just woke up the guards." The tendrils pulled us deeper into the structure, past layers of shifting reality, towards something that waited in the darkness. Something that had been waiting for a very, very long time. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard my brother's voice again, a memory or perhaps a warning. "Some truths are too big for human minds, Eliza. Some discoveries should remain undiscovered." What is consciousness? We think we understand it, that flickering candle of awareness that makes us human. But deep in that ancient prison, surrounded by impossibilities, I learned that what we call consciousness is merely the smallest ripple on an infinite ocean of awareness. And some forms of awareness were never meant to touch human minds. The chamber the Nereid was dragged into defied Euclidean geometry. Containment units lined walls that curved in ways that shouldn't be possible, each one a transparent cell that seemed to contain its own pocket of warped space-time. The creatures within, no, creatures, is too simple a word. The entities we saw existed in multiple states simultaneously, their forms shifting between dimensions like smoke curling through air. Sweet Jesus, Reyes breathed, his military composure finally cracking. Are they alive? I don't think our definition of alive applies here, Vega responded, his voice trembling. Look at how they interact with the space around them. It's like they're leaking into reality. He was right. The boundaries between the entities and the space containing them seemed fluid, uncertain. In one cell, something that appeared to be made of crystalline shapes constantly reformed itself, each configuration more impossible than the last. In another, a mass of writhing tentacles phased in and out of our dimension, their movements leaving trails of distorted space-time in their wake. Tara had given up on her instruments entirely. They were displaying readings that fluctuated between 0 and infinity. The power required to maintain these containment fields, it's beyond anything humanity could generate in 1,000 years. That's when we heard it. A voice cutting through our comm system that had been dead for hours. It was clear, authoritative, and terrifyingly familiar. Project Abyssal Ward, breach confirmation protocol initiated. All observation teams, maintain isolation procedures. Subjects must not reach the surface. My blood ran cold. That's Admiral Chen's voice. But he died 20 years ago, Reyes finished, his face pale. I attended his funeral. The recording continued, emotionless. If you are receiving this message, you have discovered humanity's greatest mistake. In 1951, we opened a door we couldn't close. What came through? They weren't aliens, not as we understand them. They were what existed before our universe settled on its rules. The old ones, the scientists called them. Things that remember when reality was fluid, when the laws of physics were still being written. Through the viewport, I watched as one of the entities turned its attention toward us. It was impossible to tell if it had eyes, but I felt its awareness crash into my mind like a tsunami. In that moment, I understood why my brother had vanished, why this place had been hidden so carefully. The knowledge of what existed down here was itself a kind of infection, a corruption of everything we thought we knew about reality. The prison was their idea, the recording continued. A compromise. We couldn't destroy them. They existed partly outside our reality, but they agreed to be contained. In exchange, the message crackled with static, but I already knew what it would say. The patterns I'd been seeing, the symbols that had seemed almost readable, they weren't a warning. They were terms of a contract written in the language of reality itself. In exchange for what? Tara whispered, but her voice cracked as one of the containment cells began to flicker. In exchange for insurance, I said, the terrible truth finally clicking into place. They agreed to be imprisoned as long as humanity progressed according to their plan. We weren't meant to advance too quickly, to understand too much. This facility isn't just a prison, it's a failsafe. If humanity ever reached a point where we could truly comprehend what we'd found. The lights in the chamber pulsed, and more containment fields began to falter. Then all deals would be off, Reyes concluded grimly. They say death is the great equalizer. But what happens when you encounter something that exists beyond death, beyond life, beyond the very concepts we use to make sense of existence? In those final moments within the prison, as reality itself began to unravel around us, I learned that there are fates far worse than death, and some of them are watching us, always watching, from behind the thin veil of what we call reality. The structure was tearing itself apart, or perhaps transforming. It was impossible to tell where destruction ended and metamorphosis began. The containment cells were failing in sequence, each collapse releasing waves of distorted space-time that made my thoughts feel like shattered glass in my skull. The hull won't take much more of this, Tara screamed over the cacophony of reality breaking down around us. The molecular structure is, oh God, it's starting to quantum tunnel. Vega had backed himself into a corner, blood trickling from his nose and ears. His eyes were fixed on something moving in the darkness between the cells. Do you see it? The geometries. They're perfect, absolutely perfect. His voice had taken on a dreamy quality that terrified me more than his fear would have. Vega, snap out of it, Reyes barked, but it was too late. What happened next occurred in fragments, as if reality itself couldn't quite agree on the sequence of events. A shape emerged from between dimensions, not moving through space so much as folding space around itself. It was vast, impossible. Vega reached toward it, his face transformed by a terrible rapture. The mathematics. It's so beautiful. Those were his last words. The entity didn't so much consume him as it solved him, like a complex equation being reduced to its simplest form. One moment Vega was there, the next he was, redistributed, his matter and energy reconfigured into patterns that hurt to look at. Full power to engines, Reyes roared, his hands dancing over the controls. The Nereid systems screamed in protest as we tried to pull free from the tendrils still gripping our hull. Through the viewport, I saw more entities emerging from their failed containment cells, each one moving in ways that suggested they were crossing multiple planes of existence simultaneously. The corridors are sealing themselves, Tara reported, her fingers flying over what remained of our navigation systems. No, not sealing. The space itself is folding. She was right. The structure around us was collapsing, but not inward. It was collapsing through dimensions we couldn't perceive. I saw hallways twist into Mobius strips of space-time, saw rooms that contained infinite recursions of themselves. There. I pointed to a gap in the shifting geometry of the prison's interior. That passage still maintains normal space-time. Reyes didn't hesitate. He drove the Nereid forward with everything our engines had left, even as more tendrils tried to snare us. The hull groaned under pressures both physical and metaphysical. Warning lights flashed across every console as our systems approached critical failure. Behind us, I caught one last glimpse of what was emerging from the depths of the prison. It was a procession of entities that seemed to be made of pure mathematics, each one more impossible than the last. They moved not through space, but through the underlying code of reality itself. The last thing I remember before we reached the exit was a voice, not heard with my ears but felt in the fabric of my being. The contract is void. We remember when your laws were written. Now we shall rewrite them. The Nereid burst free of the prison just as a massive implosion began, not of matter and energy, but of reality itself. The water around us churned. As we ascended through the darkness, fleeing that impossible place, I realized that we weren't just running from death. We were running from the end of everything we thought we knew about the universe, and we weren't going to be fast enough. Is ignorance truly bliss? Or is it merely a comfortable lie we tell ourselves, a thin blanket we pull over our heads to hide from the terrors lurking in the dark? As I sit here in my cabin aboard the Erebus, watching military helicopters approach through the growing storm, I wonder if humanity was ever really in control of its own destiny. The footage from our escape is mostly corrupted, the video showing nothing but quantum static and impossible colors. But one audio file survived, the same message we heard in the prison, but complete this time. Project Abyss, containment breach confirmed. The old ones have deemed humanity's progress excessive. Technological advancement has exceeded permitted parameters. Retrieval teams inbound. Survivors will be neutralized. The reset protocol has been initiated. Reset protocol. The words echo in my mind as I stare at the calculations I've been working on since our return to the surface. The patterns we saw in the prison weren't just symbols, they were equations, formulas describing not just our universe, but the process of its formation. And now, its reformation. They're here, Reyes announces grimly, checking the pistol he somehow managed to bring aboard. We both know it's useless against what's coming, but there's something admirable about his refusal to go down without a fight. Tara hasn't spoken since we surfaced. She sits in the corner, drawing the same patterns over and over, her eyes focused on something none of us can see. Sometimes she mumbles about the optimization of reality and quantum recursion of consciousness. I look down at my hands and notice that my fingers are starting to leave trails in the air. Not after images, but actual traces in space-time, like reality itself is becoming less solid. Through the window, I see the approaching helicopters begin to distort, their shapes twisting into fractal patterns that extend into dimensions I suddenly, terrifyingly can perceive. They're not here to silence us, they're here to witness what happens next. The sky above is transforming too, the clouds forming into perfect mathematical shapes that hurt to look at. This isn't an ending, it's a correction. A return to a state of reality that existed before the universe settled on its current rules. As space and time begin to fold around us like origami in the hands of a mad god, I finally understand the true horror. We were never the wardens of that prison. We were the experiment. And now, the experiment is being terminated. I take one last look at my final message, knowing it will never be sent. If you're reading this, it means reality, as we know it still exists. But if you look closely, at the spaces between atoms, at the gaps between moments, at the patterns in everything from seashells to galaxies, you might see them. The old ones. Still watching, still calculating, still waiting to rewrite the equations that govern our existence. And next time, humanity won't even be a variable in their calculations. The geometries are beautiful in their terrible way. Perfect. Absolutely perfect.